I still remember the moment my world cracked open like a fault line, splitting my life into before and after Dot. It was a humid August afternoon, the kind where the Miami heat felt like a second skin. I had just come home from my summer job, still in my uniform, smelling like fryer oil and exhaustion. My hands were trembling as I unfolded the letter. My official acceptance into the university of my dreams. For years, my father had promised me that when the time came, he would handle everything: the tuition, the housing, the books. I never doubted it. He had always provided, always told me that my education mattered more than anything. But then she came, Melissa, his new wife. She wasn't much older than me, yet she carried herself like royalty, as if stepping into my father's life made her the rightful queen of our home. From the moment she arrived, things began to shift. At first it was small. Dinners became just the two of them. Vacations no longer included me. Then it escalated. My father's time, his attention, his money. It all flowed in one direction. I still hear his voice from that night, heavy with something I now recognize as cowardice. "I can't pay for this, Emma." I had laughed, assuming it was a joke. But when I looked at his face, all the air in my lungs disappeared. "You'll figure something out," he added. "You're smart." And just like that, my future turned into a question mark. The disbelief hit first, then the slow, creeping realization. He wasn't joking. My father, the man who had always assured me that my education was a priority, was abandoning me when it mattered most. I tried to reason with him. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe he didn't realize how much I had counted on him. But the moment I saw Melissa standing behind him, arms crossed, her lips curled in that smug little smirk, I knew exactly what had happened. She had won. I had seen the way she worked him. Subtle, insidious. At first it was casual comments, little jabs about how kids needed to be more independent these days. Then it became outright suggestions. Emma should take responsibility for her own future. College is overrated anyway. We have other expenses to think about. And my father, blinded by whatever spell she had cast over him, had listened. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands clenched into fists. "But you promised," I whispered. Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt maybe, or something weaker. "Things change, Emma. It's just not possible right now." I turned to Melissa, searching for any sign of humanity in her expression. But all I saw was triumph. "You're doing the right thing, Mark," she purred, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "She'll learn to stand on her own 2 feet." I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. So I did the only thing I could. I walked away. The next few years were hell. I worked 2 jobs, took out every loan I could get my hands on, and scraped by on scholarships. There were nights I went to bed hungry, nights I questioned if I would make it. But I pushed through. I refused to fail. While my father and Melissa vacationed in Europe, bought a new house, and lived like royalty, I was barely surviving. And yet, in some twisted way, it made me stronger. I learned to rely on no one but myself. I built a life from the ground up with no safety net, no backup plan. And when I finally graduated, top of my class no less, I realized something. I didn't need him. I had done what he thought I couldn't, and I had done it alone. But life has a funny way of coming full circle, because 5 years later, the man who had turned his back on me was the one knocking on my door. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The man standing on my doorstep wasn't the father I remembered, the confident, successful businessman who once wore tailored suits and carried himself with an air of effortless authority. This man looked small. His once proud shoulders slumped under the weight of something heavy, something that had hollowed him out from the inside. His hair, always neatly styled, was graying at the temples, unkempt. His clothes, while still expensive, looked wrinkled and worn, as if he had stopped caring. And then there were his eyes. The same ones that had looked away when he told me I was on my own now stared at me, pleading. "Emma," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his face. "It's been a long time." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just looked at him. 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years of watching from a distance while he and Melissa lived the life I was supposed to be a part of. 5 years of struggling, of scraping by, of proving to myself that I didn't need him. Dot. And now he was here? "Can I come in?" he asked. I still didn't speak. I should have shut the door in his face. That's what the old me would have done. The girl he abandoned. The girl he left behind. Dot. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Dot. So I stepped aside. Dot. He walked in slowly, as if expecting me to change my mind at any second. He took in my apartment. Minimal but clean. Modern but not extravagant. I had worked for every inch of this place. No handouts, no shortcuts, just me. "So," I said finally, arms crossed, voice cold. "What do you want?" I watched his throat bob as he swallowed hard. Dot. And then he said it. The words I never thought I'd hear. "I need your help." I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt something close to victory, seeing the man who once dismissed me as a burden now standing in front of me, desperate. Dot. But all I felt was nothing. Dot. No anger, no sadness, just emptiness. I tilted my head, pretending to consider. "Help? That's interesting, because the last time I needed help, you told me to figure it out." His face twisted in shame. "I know," he said. "I was wrong." I let the silence stretch between us, letting him sit with it. I wanted to hear him say it again. I wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done. Dot. But finally, impatience won. "What happened?" I asked. Dot. His hands balled into fists like he was trying to hold himself together. "Melissa is gone." A slow smirk curled at the corner of my lips. "Of course she is." Dot. She had drained him dry, hadn't she? I had seen it coming from the moment she walked into our lives. Women like her didn't stick around when the money ran out, and clearly, that's exactly what had happened. "She took everything," he admitted, his voice tight. "The house, the cars, my accounts. She wiped me out, Emma, and my business." He hesitated, looking down at his hands. "It's failing." A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. "Let me get this straight. You chose her over me. You poured all of your money, all of your time into her, while I was out here struggling to survive. And now, when she screws you over, you come to me?" His shoulders sagged. "I know I don't deserve it, but you're the only person I have left." I should have been reveling in this moment. I should have been enjoying his downfall. But instead, I felt something else creeping in. Something I wasn't expecting. Dot. Pity. Dot. Because for the first time, I saw my father for what he truly was. Dot. Weak. Dot. Not cruel, not malicious. Just weak. A man who had never been able to stand on his own, who had always needed someone else to prop him up. First, it was me. Then, it was Melissa. And now he wanted it to be me again. Dot. But I wasn't that little girl anymore. I wasn't the one who needed him. Dot. He was the one who needed me. Dot. And that changed everything. I let the silence settle between us, watching him shift uncomfortably. He was waiting for me to react, to show sympathy, to offer help, to tell him that despite everything, he was still my father. But I had nothing to give him. I had spent years resenting him, years clawing my way out of the hole he had thrown me into. And now, when I finally had solid ground beneath my feet, he wanted to pull me back in? "I don't know what you expect me to do," I said finally, keeping my tone flat. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, as if trying to hold on to the last fragments of his pride. I just need a chance, Emma, alone, advice, something. I can't do this alone. I almost laughed at the irony. I can't do this alone. Dot. The words I had once screamed at him in desperation, back when I was an 18-year-old girl on the verge of losing everything. The words he had brushed aside with a dismissive nod, a hollow excuse. And now they belonged to him. I should have told him no. I should have turned him away the way he had turned me away. But something inside me, something sharp, something calculated, kept me from slamming the door in his face. Maybe it was the fact that, for once, I was the one holding the power. I tapped my fingers against the kitchen counter, pretending to think it over. "So let me get this straight," I said, tilting my head. "You want me to save your failing business?" His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "And if I don't?" A shadow passed over his face. "I'll lose everything." I leaned back, arms crossed. "Funny. That's exactly what you told me when you cut me off. You said I'd figure something out." "So," I shrugged, "figure something out." His face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of real desperation. He wasn't just here for money, he was drowning. And for once, there was no Melissa to bail him out. "I know I made a mistake," he said, voice thick with something close to shame. "I should have helped you. I should have been there. But I wasn't. And now, I—" He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I just don't know where else to turn." I studied him, letting his words sink in. Dot. This was it. Dot, the moment I had been waiting for. The moment where I could finally make him feel what I had felt. Dot. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Dot, calculated. Dot. Because I wasn't just going to turn him away. I was going to make him understand. I pushed off the counter and grabbed a pen, then pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I could feel his eyes on me, confused, uncertain. Then I turned, slid the paper across the counter, and met his gaze head on. "You want my help?" I asked, my voice cool, controlled. "Then here's the deal." He hesitated before picking up the paper. As his eyes scanned the words, his face slowly drained of color. "You work for me now, Dad." He stared at the paper as if it were a death sentence. His fingers trembled slightly as he read through the terms I had outlined in crisp, professional detail. Salary, minimum base pay, no executive privileges, no decision-making power. All final authority belongs to Emma Callahan. I had built his business back up from the ashes, and now I was offering him a place in it. Not as a leader, not as a father being given mercy, but as an employee, a subordinate. Dot. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "This?" He shook his head. "Emma, you can't be serious." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Oh, I'm very serious." "You want me to— what? Take orders from you?" I arched a brow. "Why not? Isn't that what you told me when I asked for help? That I needed to learn how to make my own way? To be independent?" I gestured at the paper. "Well, I did, and now you're the one who needs saving." His lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the fight in his eyes, the sheer refusal to accept that he was no longer in control. The man who had once been the king of his own empire was now standing in my kitchen, begging for scraps. Dot, and I was the one holding the leash. "Emma." He ran a hand over his face, sighing deeply. "I can't work for you. I built that company. It's mine." "Not anymore." My voice was quiet, but firm. "You lost the right to claim it when you abandoned the person who would have been your greatest investment." I pushed away from the counter, stepping closer. "I didn't need you to pay for my education. I would have been fine either way. But you made a choice. You chose her. You chose vacations and luxury, and a woman who drained you dry." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. And now that she's gone, now that you have nothing, you suddenly remember the daughter you left behind? I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. Convenient timing, don't you think? He flinched at my words, but I didn't stop. I'm not the helpless girl you left behind. I survived without you. I thrived without you. And the only reason I'm even considering helping you now is because I want you to feel what it's like to have your fate resting in someone else's hands. I tapped the paper in front of him. So this is the deal. You work under me. No exceptions, no shortcuts. You show up on time, you follow the rules, and you do exactly as you're told. His face was a storm of emotions: anger, humiliation, regret. And I reveled in it. You want to talk about being independent? I continued. Then prove it. Show me that you can survive without me the way you expected me to survive without you. A thick silence stretched between us. He clenched his jaw so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Dot then comma, finally. He exhaled sharply and grabbed the pen. And with shaking hands, my father signed away the last piece of his pride. The pen scraped against the paper, each stroke slow and deliberate, as if he were carving his own defeat into the contract. When he finished, he set the pen down with a quiet click and exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. He wouldn't look at me. I picked up the contract and examined his signature. Small, almost hesitant. Nothing like the bold, confident signature I remembered from years ago. Back when he was the man who held all the power. Now, that power belonged to me. I'll have HR process this by the end of the day, I said, folding the paper neatly. Your official start date is Monday, 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late. He finally met my eyes, something unreadable flickering behind them. And if I am, I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you're fired. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He knew I meant it. For the first time in his life, my father wasn't above the rules. Monday morning came, and I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I had no meeting scheduled. I just wanted to be there when he walked in. The company had changed since I took over. The cold, sterile walls of his old office had been replaced with a sleek, modern space that actually encouraged productivity instead of intimidation. People walked with purpose, not fear. The staff, once treated like disposable assets, now worked with the kind of loyalty that couldn't be bought, only earned. And then, at exactly 8:59 a.m., my father walked in. He looked different. His usual arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by something hesitant, almost cautious. He wore a suit, but it wasn't the custom-tailored perfection he used to flaunt. This one was older, slightly worn, as if he hadn't bought a new one in years. Good. I watched as he approached the receptionist, who barely spared him a glance before directing him toward the employee orientation room. He hesitated for half a second, probably expecting special treatment, but when none came, he nodded stiffly and followed orders. I didn't make direct contact with him that first week. I let him struggle. I let him experience what it was like to be just another employee, to sit through training sessions and performance evaluations like everyone else. And I made sure he earned every single dollar of that minimum base pay. I heard the whispers, the hushed conversations from employees who had worked under him before. They watched with wide-eyed fascination as their former boss answered phones, sorted paperwork, and took orders from the very people he once dismissed as beneath him. Some found it amusing. Others pitied him. I didn't feel either. I just watched. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about lessons. A month passed, then another. And something unexpected happened. My father adapted. Slowly, hesitantly, but he did. He learned the systems, took instructions without complaint, and shockingly began to listen. There was no more barking orders, no more entitled attitude. He was still quiet around me, always keeping his head down whenever I walked past his desk. But he was there, Dot. And maybe, just maybe, he was finally understanding what it felt like to be on the other side, Dot. Then, one evening, just as I was packing up my things, I heard a knock at my office door. I looked up, Dot. And there he was, Dot standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I need to talk to you," he said. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "About?" He hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. I was wrong. The words hung between us, heavy and raw. I raised an eyebrow. "About what exactly?" His jaw tightened, but he forced himself to continue. "About you. About everything. I should have been there for you. I should have kept my promise." He swallowed hard. "And I should have never chosen her over my own daughter." Silence stretched between us, Dot. For the first time in years, my father wasn't making excuses. Dot, he wasn't blaming Melissa. He wasn't justifying his choices. Dot, he was owning them. I studied him carefully, searching for any sign of manipulation, of self-pity. But there was none. Dot, just regret, Dot. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I just felt tired. I sighed, rubbing my temple. "It's not that simple, Dad." "I know." His voice was quiet. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it." Another silence. Then, without another word, he turned and left. I watched him go, my emotions tangled in ways I wasn't ready to untangle, Dot, because I had won. I'd taken everything from him, just as he had taken everything from me. Dot, and yet, somehow, it didn't feel like victory. Weeks passed after that conversation, but something had shifted. My father still worked for me, still did his job without complaint, but there was a weight in the air now, a quiet understanding that neither of us knew how to address. I wasn't ready to forgive him. Maybe I never would be. But the rawness of my anger had dulled, leaving something else in its place, something I wasn't sure how to name. Then, one afternoon, I got a call. It was from a lawyer. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone measured. "I'm reaching out regarding your father. He's requested that you be informed about some legal matters concerning his estate." I frowned, my grip tightening on the phone. "What estate?" The lawyer hesitated. "He doesn't have much left, but he's been working on something. He wants you to be aware of it." My pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" "He's been setting up a fund," the lawyer explained. "A scholarship in your name for young women in similar circumstances, those who've been denied the opportunities they deserve." I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. "What?" "He's been funneling every extra dollar from his paychecks into it," the lawyer continued. "It's not much yet, but he wanted you to know." I sat there silent, my mind struggling to process it. This was my father, the same man who had once told me my education wasn't worth the investment, the same man who had let me struggle, who had turned his back on me. And now he was trying to fix it. Not with words, not with apologies. But with action. I didn't know what to say. "Would you like to meet with him to discuss it?" the lawyer asked. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't know how to finish the sentence. Because for the first time since this all began, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I didn't meet with him right away. But I thought about it. Every day I thought about it. And then one evening, after another long workday, I found myself outside his apartment. It was small, modest, nothing like the grand house he'd once lived in. I knocked Dot. The door opened a few moments later, and there he was. Dot surprised, hesitant Dot, but hopeful. I swallowed hard. Let's talk. He stepped aside, letting me in, and for the first time in years, we sat down. Really sat down and started to rebuild. IT wasn't easy, Dot. It wasn't perfect, Dot. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start. I sat across from my father in his small, sparsely furnished apartment, the silence stretching between us like an unspoken challenge. The walls were bare, the furniture secondhand, a stark contrast to the lavish home he had once shared with Melissa. It was humbling in a way to see him like this. A man who had once thought himself untouchable, now reduced to something fragile. He poured us both cups of coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he set mine in front of me. I watched the steam curl into the air, wondering how long it had been since we'd last shared a quiet moment like this. Years, entire lifetimes. I never expected you to come, he admitted, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. I let out a breath, studying his face. The wrinkles were deeper now, the weight of regret pressing into his features like an artist carving lines into stone. His once proud posture was slightly hunched, like he was carrying something heavy on his back. Guilt, maybe, or the realization of everything he had lost. I almost didn't, I said honestly. But then I got that call. He flinched slightly, nodding. The scholarship. I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle on my tongue. Why? He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. Because I was wrong, Emma. About everything. About you. He swallowed, the words seeming to physically pain him. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't if I were you. But I wanted to try to give back in some way. I don't have much left, but at least I can do something right before it's too late. I studied him, searching for deception, for the selfishness that had always been there before. But I didn't find it. Instead, I saw something else, something I hadn't seen in a long, long time. Dot, sincerity, Dot, maybe even shame. I let the silence stretch, turning over his words in my mind. I wanted to stay angry. It was easier. It kept me safe. But for the first time, that anger felt like an old coat I'd outgrown. Heavy, unnecessary. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to carry anymore. I set my cup down carefully. You don't get to erase the past, Dad. I know. His voice was quiet, rough. I wouldn't ask you to. I leaned back, folding my arms. So what now? He hesitated. I don't know. His gaze met mine, tentative. But I'd like to figure it out if you'll let me. There it was, the olive branch. I stared at it, at him, at the man I had hated for so long, Dot. And I realized something Dot hating him had fueled me. It had kept me moving, kept me pushing forward, kept me proving to myself that I didn't need him. But now, I was here. I had won. I had built a life for myself, a career, a name. I had saved him, Dot, and I wasn't sure I needed that hatred anymore. I let out a slow breath. Dot, maybe this wasn't about him. Maybe it never had been, Dot. Maybe this was about me. I don't know either, I admitted. Dot. His lips twitched, the ghost of a sad smile. That's a start. I didn't answer Dot. But for the first time in a long time, I thought that maybe, just maybe, it really was Dot. In the weeks that followed, I found myself slipping into a strange, unfamiliar routine, one where my father existed, not as a distant shadow or a source of anger, but as a presence in my life. It wasn't easy. Every interaction felt like stepping through a minefield of old wounds, memories waiting to explode beneath the surface. But I kept going. Not for him, for myself. The scholarship fund he had started began to grow. I donated to it, not because I wanted to redeem him, but because I believed in the cause. I knew what it was like to have dreams crushed under the weight of someone else's selfishness. If I could help even one girl avoid that fate, it would be worth it. Dot still, comma. Something inside me remained unsettled. Dot one evening. I drove home from work, the city lights blurring through my windshield as my mind churned over everything. The anger was gone, yes, but something else had taken its place. A strange hollowness, an ache I didn't know how to name. Dot closure, comma, I realized. I'd never really gotten it. Dot. My father had lost everything, but he had never felt the pain the way I had. He had never lived my nights of hunger, my exhaustion, my despair. Dot. And no matter how much time passed, I still wanted him to understand. Dot. The next day, I made a decision. I showed up at his apartment unannounced, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He answered the door in his usual worn-out clothes, blinking in surprise. Emma? I pushed past him, stepping inside. We need to talk. He closed the door slowly, wary. All right. I set the coffee on the table and folded my arms. I want to take you somewhere. He frowned. Where? I met his gaze, unwavering. Back to where it started. He hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face, but he nodded. Okay. We drove in silence, the city shifting around us as I took him to the place I had spent my darkest years. The tiny, crumbling apartment where I had lived as a student, barely able to afford rent. The diner where I had worked night shifts, the university library where I had studied until my eyes burned. The pawn shop where I had once sold a necklace my mother had given me just to afford groceries. I parked outside my old apartment building, the brick worn and faded, the metal stairs rusting at the edges. This was home, I said, stepping out. He followed, looking up at the building with an unreadable expression. You lived here? I nodded. For 4 years, with 3 roommates. No heating in the winter, no air conditioning in the summer. Sometimes I had to choose between paying rent and eating. His face paled, his hands clenching at his sides. Emma, I cut him off. I don't need an apology. I need you to see it, to feel it. I led him through the streets, past the places that had shaped me. The reality of my struggle pressed against him. Tangible, undeniable. Dot. By the time we returned to the car, his shoulders had slumped, his expression hollow. He looked older, as if he had aged years in just a few hours. I didn't know, he whispered. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life. You didn't want to know. He nodded slowly, his hands trembling in his lap. For the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes, a deep, gnawing regret. Dot. And for the first time, I felt something close to peace. Dot. Maybe this was what I had needed all along. Not revenge, not power. Dot, just for him to finally understand. Dot. The silence between us was heavier than it had ever been. My father sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly out the window, his fingers twitching against his knee. I could see it, the weight of everything I'd shown him pressing down on him, suffocating. And yet, a part of me wondered if it was enough. Could someone like him ever truly understand what it felt like to be discarded? To be forced to fight for survival while the person who was supposed to protect you lived in careless luxury? I pulled back onto the road, driving aimlessly through the city. I didn't know where I was going. Maybe I just wanted him to sit in his own thoughts for a while, to let the silence do what words couldn't. But after a few minutes, he spoke. Emma. His voice was hoarse, almost pleading. I gripped the wheel tighter. Don't, just don't. He exhaled sharply, his head falling back against the seat. I should have been better. I didn't reply. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have known what I was giving up. He swallowed hard. I don't even know if I can fix it. You can't. My voice was flat, emotionless. That's the point. Some things don't get fixed. Some damage is permanent. He flinched, but he didn't argue. I stopped at a red light, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. I had spent years carrying my anger, my resentment, shaping myself around it like armor. Now that he was sitting beside me, broken, regretful, what was left? The light turned green. I didn't move. I spent years hating you, I admitted quietly. It kept me going. It gave me something to hold on to when everything else felt impossible. He turned to look at me, his eyes glassy. I deserve that. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, you do. The car behind me honked. I shook my head, pressing the gas pedal. We drove in silence for a while longer before I finally made a decision. I want you to do something, I said. Not for me, for yourself. He frowned, wary. What is it? I turned into a familiar street and pulled up in front of a shelter, a women's support center. You're going to volunteer here. His eyebrows furrowed. Emma, I don't think you owe a debt, I interrupted. Not just to me, but to every kid who's ever been abandoned, to every student who's been told they weren't worth the investment. You can't change the past, but you can do something now. He hesitated, his gaze flicking between me and the shelter's entrance. This is the only thing I'll ever ask from you, I said. Take it or leave it. He swallowed, then nodded. I watched him step out of the car, his shoulders hunched, his hands shaking slightly as he approached the building. I didn't know if he would follow through. I didn't know if it would change anything. But as I drove away, for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe I wasn't waiting for his redemption. Maybe I had just needed to let go. Emma had come full circle. She was no longer the lost, angry girl who once blamed her father for her pain. The sting of betrayal had been replaced by the clarity of action. Over the years, her drive to prove herself had turned into something more, something deeper. She wasn't seeking revenge for the sake of revenge anymore. What she had achieved, what she had built, had given her the power to make the final decision, to rewrite the narrative that had been handed to her. Her father, Mark, had changed too. No longer the distant figure. He had spent months volunteering, putting in the effort to work with the women and children at the shelter. But Emma knew, deep down, that his redemption would never truly be complete. Not for what he had done, not for how he had torn apart her childhood. Melissa, on the other hand, was still in her world of superficiality. But as Emma had once learned, everything built on lies eventually crumbles. The day had come. It was at a gala, the kind of extravagant event that Emma had once attended, only as a silent observer, a dreamer wishing she could belong. Tonight, she was there as a guest of honor. She had been invited to receive an award for her work with the scholarship fund. But for Emma, this was more than a celebration. It was the final act of a story that had been years in the making. Melissa was there too, the woman who had manipulated Mark and torn apart their family. She had gone from enjoying luxury to being reduced to nothing more than a hollow shell of her former self. Rumors had started circulating about her financial schemes, her lavish spending, and the sudden, unexplainable disappearance of Mark's assets. It was Emma who had made sure those rumors found their way to the right places. She had quietly orchestrated the leak of Melissa's financial misconduct to the press, and now she watched as Melissa's smile faltered when a journalist approached her, a camera in hand. "Excuse me, Mrs. Cross," the journalist asked, his voice professional but insistent. "Can you explain your involvement in the disappearance of funds from Mark Wellington's estate?" The shock on Melissa's face was evident, her perfect facade cracking like glass. She attempted to recover, but the damage was already done. The whispers spread like wildfire, the story unfolding for all to see. Her extravagant lifestyle, the vacations, the new cars, the private jets, suddenly had an explanation. And none of it was legal. Mark Kama, standing by Emma's side, watched it unfold. There was no pride in his eyes, no vindication. There was only the painful realization that he had been played, that everything he had thought was a perfect life had been a lie. "I told you," Emma whispered to him, her words barely audible over the crowd's murmurs. "She used you. She always was." And now, she had no one left to manipulate. The final blow came when the company Mark had worked so hard to build was put under investigation for fraud. The legal ramifications were severe. Within weeks, the business was seized, and every asset Melissa had enjoyed was frozen. Her name became synonymous with scandal, her reputation destroyed. There was no escape from the fallout. As Melissa was escorted out of the gala by security, her eyes met Emma's. There was nothing but emptiness in them. She knew it was over. And as for Mark, he had lost it all. The woman he had tried to protect, the business he had poured his soul into, the reputation he had built, gone. He was left standing, stripped of everything, with only Emma standing beside him. He had wanted his daughter's forgiveness. He had begged for a second chance, but what he had failed to see was that the second chance was never going to come from him. It had to come from her own strength, her own resolve. Months later, Emma found herself sitting in the office of her newly renovated company building, an empire she had built from scratch. Her heart no longer carried the weight of resentment, but it was hard to ignore the scars of the past. Mark Kama, having lost everything, was now back to square one. He lived in a small apartment, barely scraping by. He had no business to fall back on, no luxury to cushion his fall. He had no choice but to take whatever work he could find. But even then, the damage was done. The world had seen him for what he was, a man manipulated, a man who had chosen his comfort over his daughter's future. He called Emma occasionally, always asking if she could help him find something stable, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. Melissa, meanwhile, was trying to rebuild her life, but no one would give her a second chance. Her name had been dragged through the mud too many times. The money had dried up, and the connections she had once relied on turned their backs. She was left alone, with nothing but her pride to cling to. A's for Emma. Life was quieter now. She focused on expanding her scholarship foundation, helping young women like herself who had been given no chances and forced to fight for their futures. She kept her distance from Mark, and as much as she hated to admit it, a small part of her mourned the father she never had. But it was better this way. She couldn't afford to fall back into that old dynamic of saving him. She had saved herself, and that was enough. It was late one evening when Emma received a message. Just a simple text, no words, only a photo. The image was of her father, sitting alone at a bar, his face hollow, the weight of everything crashing down on him. "I'm sorry. I know I ruined everything." It wasn't an apology she needed. She had heard enough of those. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed her phone. Setting it down on the desk, she didn't need to say anything. She'd already moved on. She leaned back in her chair, gazing out the window at the skyline of the city, the lights blinking like stars in the distance. "I'm done," she whispered to herself, and for the first time, it feels like I've finally won. With that, she stood up, walking away from the past she had left behind, the weight of it lifted for good.